Welcome back to Eye on Northwest Politics. The interview you're about to see with Portland Police Association President Aaron Schmautz was taped before some important news came out regarding Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty and the PPA. Commissioner Hardesty is suing the Portland Police Association and its former president for $5 million. Hardesty says they leaked information last spring that intentionally misidentified her as a suspect in a hit and run. I did reach out to Aaron Schmautz after that news broke. He said he had no comment on the Hardesty lawsuit. Here's my interview with Sergeant Schmautz. We've been hearing a lot about low morale within the Portland Police Bureau, the staffing shortage, difficulty in hiring new officers, and the fact that officers are retiring or going to other agencies. So Eye on Northwest Politics wants to know why this is happening and what it will take to turn things around. Most people say this started with the riots and demonstrations that happened after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis in 2020. Portland had the largest and the longest lasting protests in the nation. We also saw a lot of destruction and vandalism. Portland police were in the eye of that storm as they faced some criticism from some sectors about how they handled the demonstrations. Portland has seen homicides, property crimes, and traffic fatalities rise to unprecedented levels over the past year. And we saw the dissolution of the gun violence reduction team, reductions in the traffic division, the continued exodus of officers from the Bureau, and a rise in calls to cut police budgets. Here to address those issues is Aaron Schmautz, the new president of the Portland Police Association. Aaron, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk about morale within the Bureau. Is there really a morale problem? And if so, why?
So there is, and the PPA represents both the police bureau and our dispatchers and our PS3s. And morale is just broken in many ways. You look at within the police bureau and our officers who are managing these calls, being short-staffed and just having all of the issues we've had over the last year are kind of compounding factors. You look at officers coming to work and having graffiti on the walls in front of their work and their buildings boarded up with, graffiti that says they want to kill the police or things like that. This is obviously you enter into your day just feeling unwanted, and then when you have just 30 or 40 or 50 calls holding when you go to work, when you get into work, our detectives with homicide and violent assault and robbery caseloads that exceed anything we've ever seen. There's a level of hope that starts to fade. Within the dispatch units, I mean, when you have 911 calls that are holding for 10 or even sometimes when it's really critical, 15 minutes, and we're not talking about non-emergency calls. You're talking about people calling, because someone's having a heart attack or someone's, having a medical issue or someone is facing the scariest day of their lives, and they're having to wait on hold. It just really starts to feel hopeless, and so. We got to find solutions to these problems, and the morale really is just it's becoming crushing.
Some people question whether there really is a police staffing shortage. Is there? Obviously, you're saying there is, and how does that affect public safety?
Yeah, there definitely is a staffing issue. When you're having to utilize overtime, which every single day we're having to just to get to minimums. When call times are up and response times are up, when you don't have the ability to spend the same amount of time on those calls, and you're hearing, certain kinds of calls we can't even respond to or respond to in a way that's effective. When it comes to public safety, clearly there is a significant public safety issue in Portland with the rise. And I mean, we're up to, I think, about 85 homicides now, and I don't remember a time we've ever had more than about 40 shootings, pushing 1,500 shootings, violent robberies, and all the things that we're seeing. And again, I speak to community members every day, and I was talking to a business owner the other day who owns an auto body repair shop, and he was saying how with catalytic converter and like theft type repairs, how maybe he would do that 10 to 15% of his workload, and how now it's almost 100% of his workload. And insurance companies are telling him that they're looking at the actuarial rates here in Portland and how they're going to navigate that, because just those low level things that historically would be a small portion of claims are now a huge portion of claims. I'm hearing from people who say, look, I don't know what to do. And, we've recently been talking about some of the needs for private security, and people feeling that they feel that they can't even get the kind of police response they want. So they're having to pay out of pocket to get some of that service. These are all things that impact public safety, and we need to make sure that we're a part of those solutions.
Recently, we had a major police incident on Interstate 5. It included multiple carjackings, an officer-involved shooting, a police presence that shut down the interstate. We also had several homicides that day. Now, the Portland Police Bureau actually tweeted out that they would not be able to respond to lower-level calls because there just aren't enough police officers to go around, as we've been discussing. So
Yep.
how frustrating is this?
So in that, that phenomenon, our ability to only respond to emergency calls, that is something that has happened from time to time. When I was a patrol sergeant, we would have to do that when there were critical incidents. It's happening more often. I think it's important that people understand that that does not mean that if you call 911, that for sure no one's coming or something like that. The lower priority calls are things where there's no longer an active threat or an active crime occurring, and instead they're calling to file a report or something like that. Maybe you have someone who needs to be checked on, something like that. So certainly, I think our goal is not to kind of forecast to people or to project to people, hey, this is the time when you should go and engage in something because the police aren't available. Instead, we're actually trying to be more available. But again, police work is a service industry. And you can imagine our police officers and our dispatchers as well, who are sitting there taking these calls, they want to get help to people. And when they show up, they want to be able to provide excellent service. And when you have calls stacked up and you keep getting called away, many of these people who are calling, as crime rises, these are people who have never had to engage in police services before. They may be a first-time crime. And if the first time you experience a service, you feel that service is not complete, you feel like you're not getting the answers you need, that in and of itself, it has a huge impact on public trust. And so it's very frustrating to our officers when they just literally don't have the bandwidth or capacity to provide that service.
Recently on the show, we spoke with Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, and she had this to say about police staffing levels.
The reality is we don't have a staffing problem, we have a hiring problem. No one wants to be a Portland police officer today. And rather than answering the question, why is the workplace so dysfunctional that regardless of what we do, we cannot actually hire people who want to be Portland police officers?
Aaron, how do you respond to that? And do you feel you're getting enough support from City Hall to deal with the problems you're facing?
I disagree that the issue of staffing is simply because of current hiring. It's because of past hiring practices. And it's also because in the last year, we experienced a huge departure of very qualified police officers who were in the middle of their career who didn't feel supported. And they felt like if they went to another agency, they would be more supported. A culture of support for our police officers and for the work they're doing is very important. And in fact, you heard from Commissioner Maps the other day on Facebook discussing how police officers are people. They're people wearing a uniform who are going out to do their best, their level best to do a job and to keep the community safe. I disagree that nobody wants to be a police officer because I do. And I know that the police officers who are in Portland right now, they have stayed and they're willing to commit to this work. But in order to do it well, they need support. And that support can't be temporary. We can't be in an environment where we're just, something happens somewhere else in the country and we have reactionary decisions made. Instead, we need to lean into these hard conversations about how we best serve our community and make sure that when things happen, that we're not making decisions that have outsized impacts down the road. But instead, we're saying, okay, this thing happened. How do we address that? And how do we make sure that we don't react in a way that also creates an environment where police officers can't do their jobs or feel unsupported? So again, we need to make sure that we're not reactionary and instead we are always leaning into the work that needs to be done and we support the people who are doing that work.
Thank you, Aaron Schmautz, for joining us today on Eye on Northwest
You're welcome.
Politics. Next, can Portland bounce back? Former Portland mayoral candidate Jefferson Smith says the answer is yes. Next in Give Me a Minute.